Good evening. It's Sunday, the 1st of November, and we have a full house on this evening's Lagos broadcast, coming to you from Florida, Dublin, North and South, and Lisbon. We are here to discuss U2 and plenty more, 20 years on from the release of All That You Can't Leave Behind. So, John, I want to start with you and ask you about what it was like travelling with U2 back in the day, all those years ago.
Well, I had a very brief period traveling with U2 when I was writing a book which became known as Race of Angels, which was about, it started off being kind of about Ireland. And what happened was I'd done this radio series for BBC Radio 4 called Wide Awake in Ireland, stealing the title from U2, and I'd invited Bono to take part. And he was so fascinated by the topic, which was kind of like to look at the cultural underbelly of Ireland and how Ireland might relate, the present day Ireland culturally might be related to the past of Ireland. Was there a connection? Was there a thread? And so Bono said, you should write a book about this, So then when I decided I would, but I said, I'll only do it if you agree to be interviewed for it, And then I decided that actually U2 would make a very good central motif for the book, because that there was a sense that actually the culture of Ireland had erupted somehow in U2. Historically, the whole kind of eruption of the volcano of Irish culture had, in a certain sense, erupted in U2 briefly, in the late 1980s and early 90s, particularly with from Unforgettable Fire onwards, I suppose, those three albums, Unforgettable Fire, The Joshua Tree and Uptown Baby. And I was in the early 90s I was doing this, so I kind of didn't decide it would be kind of a book about U2 and Ireland and about the relationship culturally between them, because there was this kind of thing at the time that, everybody would say, oh, U2 are the biggest band in the world, and my God, they're Irish. How did that happen? That's ridiculous coincidence. That had never happened before. No, like nobody Irish is ever that good at anything. Was the vibe. And I said, well, what about if they're actually the biggest band in the world because they're Irish? Wouldn't that be far more interesting? So that was kind of the purpose of it. And so Bono agreed to be interviewed, and so I started to go around with the band a few times, and I found they were very nice guys. I got on very well with Bono and Edge and Adam. Adam, very polite guy. Not so much with Larry, to be honest. But there was one very strange incident when they were playing in Glasgow, and they were flying over. I was in the plane with them, and I was talking to Bono on the way over, and the others. I was sitting in kind of a 4 seats, with 3 other guys and me, and. When we arrived in the airport, everybody else was, you're on the plane, you're talking to your mates, and everybody got their gear and all the roadies and everybody in, and I was just talking away, and we were talking, and then I just said, oh God, I'm sorry, everybody else has gone off the plane except me and U2. So I said, oh, I better get off, and I got my gear and my bag and so on, and followed the band on and off towards the steps, right? And I just glanced out the little window, and I saw like about 500 photographers waiting at the bottom of the steps. And here was I, so it was one of those, John, Paul, George, Ringo, and Bert, so I scooted out the back, down the back steps. But it was pretty good. It was a pretty interesting time. I liked Bono a lot at the time. He was a very smart guy, and I found them very interesting. I found the whole theme of what they were doing at the time very, very interesting. That there seemed to be something. The book really ended up being about that thread of culture going right back to see, because for example, I found this poem by a guy called Andreas McCrath, a bardic poet from the medieval times, Irish, and it was like almost line for line, like that song that Bono wrote for Johnny Cash called "The Wanderer." It's an absolutely astonishing similarity between the lyrics of the two, and Bono never heard of them, So that's the kind of thing of it. It's kind of quite speculative and sometimes it's very concrete. But the interesting in talking that idea of the volcano, well, one of the things I came across was when in the area where the band grew up, Glasnevin and Ballymun and Finglas and all that, when they started to build those houses back in the 50s on that place, it's like they were built basically on top of rivers. And what used to happen quite a lot was that one of the rivers were driven underground by the construction. And what happened that you know, you're sitting in your living room watching TV and the river would suddenly burst up through the floorboards, you know, like boom. And so I kind of thought this was an amazing metaphor. So that's kind of the kind of book it was. I mean, I have to say, you know, that the book kind of made a speculative kind of conjecture about the future, and it was kind of about this whole, there was some theme at the very heart of U2's music, which seemed to be about place and cultural identity and diversity in that old sense, you know, which you don't hear about now because the word has come to mean something different entirely. That was the idea that that the particularity of every place is where culture comes from, and that needs to be nurtured and protected. And there was a big theme in it as well about, which I'll come back to maybe later, but there was this strange guy. There was this guy I knew, and I kept running into him around that time. He was from Tuam, and his name has gone completely out of my head now. But he's a wonderful technological philosopher, I would call him. And he went to school with Tom Murphy. And I'll have to find him. Anyway, I'll find him later. And his whole thing was about technology and about the way that he used to design computer machines, systems for the Japanese. And he was obsessed with the idea that we were going down the road technologically, and that we were going to create a form of technology that would steal the talents and the creativity and the humanity of human beings, which is actually what's kind of happening now. And I saw U2's whole thing in some way as being about this as well. So, I mean, I just had this idea. Mike Cooley was his name. And one day I was actually in the middle. I said, I had meant to ring him and talk to her. I meant to try and track him down and go and interview him, because he lived over in Slough in England. And one day I was coming to the end and I thought, oh God, I won't have time to talk to Mike now. And the next thing, the phone rang. And he gave me some of the best parts of the book, you know, really. Like, there's one chapter which is literally transcribed from the conversation we had about it's an amazing story that he told about stonemason in his village, in his hometown in Tuam in County Galway, where he described how the stonemason, that he and his father went long to get to order a headstone for his grandmother. And he described the conversation between the stonemason and his father, the father describing what kind of headstone he wanted. And the stonemason would just ask him questions. Well, would you like a cross, you know? And you know, he thought, no. And, well, what about an angel? And, you know, and then he says, well, what about an angel, you know? Yeah, an angel, yeah. And then, well, what about would you be looking up, down at the ground? And it was sad. And then they would look at, oh, yeah, yes. And so they come to this kind of, and he described this process as a way of kind of, this is the way culture works. This is how we describe things, shapes and things. And this is how things emerge. And then he said that when the guy said to him, he was only a young guy at the time, and he said to him, come around next week, young fella, and the hands will be out, you know. And he used to go around and see, and literally he said it was like the statue was being born from this slab of stone. And like that was, and he said he used that when he was designing computer systems. He used that model, you know, of the thing already in the thing and the stone, and created programs like this. So it's very hard to explain now because it's all in the book, but this is somehow the model of creativity I saw in Irish culture and coming through to U2 was there. But I have to say that now, just to finish, and I won't talk on too much more, but I have to say I'm very disappointed with the way it's ended. several times over the years, publishers have asked me would I like to republish the book? And I said, absolutely, yes, of course. They said, well, can you update it? And I said, but it's finished.
Yes.
It's finished, And I said, they kept insisting, and they wouldn't do it when I didn't want to write more chapters. I said, well, it's all there. The book's over. I mean, it finishes in at ROURKE. And not because it would have been finished no matter what happened, because that was the story. But actually afterwards, now the story's really gone bad, in my opinion, because now, far from actually taking up those themes, U2 have become really a voice of a kind of a corporatocracy in the world, in my view. They've kind of started to fraternize with all the wrong people. They've flipped the meaning of diversity, which is, the new kind of globalist idea. And they've essentially become a globalist band. I think because they were too terrified of losing their position, on the top of the Premiership. And for that, they just traded their souls and became just an ordinary band. And they also, I think, another part of it was that in the beginning, there was something about them that was way more than the sum of its parts. Like that kind of alchemy that used to happen when those four guys who really wanted to do this got together, and their absolute inability to play in the very beginning, and the way that they built each other's creativity and built each other's skills created all this explosion. But then at a certain point they became like just their own employees turning up for work in the office in the morning, and I think that made it become very prosaic. I mean, that album, was that before the atomic bomb? It was, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
yes. Yeah.
that was the moment when I began to lose them. And that album in particular, I didn't like it when it came out first, but everybody else did. And I was
sorry, which album is that? Sorry.
All That You Can't Leave Behind. I thought it was really because the best, obviously, Octon Baby is, I think, one of the greatest albums ever made, and ROURKE was pretty good, but it was a bit of a mishmash. It was kind of offcuts from Octon Baby. And then the next one, which is their white album, Pop. Yeah, Pop. Nobody liked except me, really.
And me.
You like it, yeah. Like there was different elements in it, and it was very eclectic. And it was one of the greatest songs they've ever written, which was "Wake Up Dead Man." And it was like this kind of extraordinary raw bluesy thing, but not quite blues either, And then I used to go back to All That You Can't Leave Behind, thinking I must be wrong. I mean, I was in a bad mood when I heard it, and then put it on again, and it would be worse than the last time I heard it, And I just thought, they've lost it. It's over. And that kind of, and I then briefly came out of that mood after with No Line on the Horizon. But I've gone back in again now, and I don't think I'm back anymore.
So, what I think, something I think is interesting actually, what you say about everybody else liking All That You Can't Leave Behind, and the others, is that something I noticed was that the lead single out of All That You Can't Leave Behind, Beautiful Day, is extremely strong. Yeah. The album itself, if you take the whole album, isn't particularly strong, but if you take something like No Line on the Horizon as an album, it's quite strong. It works very, very well.
Yeah.
But the lead single out of it, Get On Your Boots.
No, terrible.
If you listen to it in the context of the album, yeah, it works, it fits. But as a single, it's useless.
No, it doesn't. What are you talking about?
Not even.
Get On Your Boots is completely out of nowhere on that album. No Line on the Horizon's a great album, but Get On Your Boots was.
Except for that, you think? Okay.
It's just, I don't know what it was doing on that album.
Well, Stephen, I want, because John has
Let
talked
me
a lot
talk.
About, yeah, exactly. John has talked a lot about Ireland and U2 and how those things intersect and interrelate. Can you tell me a bit about your view of how U2 are treated every so often when they do return home, and that kind of, you describe it maybe as a love-hate relationship that we have with them?
What I've always noticed about when U2 come back and play in Ireland is that, well, for the years leading up to U2 playing in Ireland, everybody in the country criticizes them and hates them. And then for whatever reason, when they play in the country, everybody somehow manages to get a ticket to the concerts. And then right after the concert, everybody says, actually, you have to hand it to them. They're pretty good. They put on a pretty good live show. And for the next 2 or 3 days, everybody loves U2. And then they go straight back to hating U2 for the next 2 or 3 years.
And that continues. And so you've kind of stuck with them throughout, haven't you? You saw them first in the early 2000s, and you've never really given up on them, I think.
Myself.
Yeah, yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I saw them actually. The first time I saw them, my father brought me to New York. I was very lucky. We went to go see them in the Pop Mart tour. So I would have been about 14, and really I had no knowledge of the band apart from the fact that they were some big band. The only concert that I had seen before that was Kylie Minogue when I was about 9, when my mother dragged me along, which was awful. And then this concert started, and I was just like, who the fuck are these guys? This is the most over the top thing I've ever seen in my life. And I love it. It had Pop Mart started off with the most un-U2 kind of sounding, which is Mofo, that you can imagine. And I always actually point out that tune. When anybody thinks that they know U2, they should really listen to Mofo. It's like, it really shows how far they can go. But yeah, so I started becoming a fan in 97. And I guess it was really cemented actually during All That You Can't Leave Behind, or around that period anyway. But once I became a fan, I was immediately investigating their whole history and all the albums beforehand and stuff. So, I've done I know everything. I know Bono's ATM PIN number if anybody needs it,
And so you've actually met, obviously John has met Bono, but for normal lay people who aren't involved with showbiz, it's a big deal to meet someone like Bono, and you've had that privilege. So can you tell me about meeting him and what that was like?
Well, I've had a few accidental run-ins. I'm sure he wouldn't remember it all, but the funniest one was I actually went to film school in New York around about 2003. One morning I woke up and I was very hungover. And so I was in bed all day long, and I kept on going on to the U2 fan website. I think it was called @u2.com, which tended to have more news about the band than the official website. The main story was that Bono and his wife Ali were going to be launching a fashion collection on Saks and Fifth Avenue called the Eden Fashion Collection. And the idea was the clothes was made in Africa, blah, blah. So I stayed in bed all day, and as the day went on, I thought to myself, I should get out of bed and I should just go along because, my fluky look, I might get in. So I was in two minds about that. And then at 5 to 7, I was like, oh, fuck it. So I just threw on a jacket, got a taxi, and pulled up outside Saks and Fifth Avenue on a cold New York evening. The streets were sparkling. And, this was like right next to Trump Tower kind of thing, very kind of glitzy kind of atmosphere in the city. And as I was walking up to the front doors, I got stopped by this BBC World News reporter. His name was Tom Brooks. He does that show, Talking Movies, on BBC World News. And so he had a camera crew, and he's like, I'm sorry, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And I was like, sure. So the camera's on me, and he says to me, what do you think about ethical clothing? And I was like, yeah, ethical clothing sounds good to me. I'm all up for ethical clothing. And then he said, and what do you think about rock stars getting involved in good causes? And I was like, yep, rock stars getting good causes. That's good for me. He's like, what do you think about U2? And I was like, yep, U2, great, amazing, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, what do you think about them launching it here on Saks and Fifth Avenue? So I turned around and I had a quick look at Saks. And I turned back to the camera and I thought, do you know what, actually, it's a little bit elitist. It's a little bit upmarket. Yeah, I don't know if I really like that. Actually, I don't really like the elitism of Saks and Fifth Avenue. So anyway, that finished the interview. I went along to the doors of Saks, and there was like a red carpet, and there was loads of paparazzi, and in came Beyonce, and in came Jay-Z, and in came all these random heads. And there was a few geeky U2 fans next to me, and I was just thinking to myself, what am I doing here? This is just cringy. I'm one of those Bono geeks right now, which is something I never wanted to be, but clearly have become. And because Dublin's a small town, after a while, in walked a friend of my father's and his girlfriend. And just as they were walking in, I gave them a little nod, and they went in the door. And about 15 minutes later, the girlfriend came to the door and she said, Stephen, do you want to come in? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, here, I got a spare pass, come in. So I was like, so I stepped over the red line and said goodbye to the other U2 geeks, and in I went. So up to the 7th floor I went, and there was cocktails and there was models and there was celebrities, and I was just thinking to myself, well done, Stephen, you've done well here. So after a while, in came Bono, and I was amazed at how the energy of the room just came around this small man, and his wife. And he got up and he made a very funny speech, and his wife made a speech. And after that, he went to the side to do some interviews himself. And at this stage, I had a few drinks, and I thought, fuck it. I'm going to go over and say hello to Bono. So I went up behind him when he was literally being interviewed on camera by MTV News. And so I poked him in the back. He had his black leather, his stupid hair at the time, the shades. And I poked him, no response. Poked him again, and he turned around. And I was like, how you doing? And he was like, he shook hands with me, and he was like, nice to meet you. And I was like, just want to say, love all your albums, from the first one to the last one, all your tours, amazing. Yeah, just everything, your hair, great, So Bono was like, thanks, I really appreciate it. He said, I just have to go and finish this interview. And I was like, yeah, sure, we'll talk after, sure, So Bono went back to finish the interview, and, that would have made a great night. So I drank everything in New York that night. And the next morning I woke up with a raging hangover. And I went on to u2.com, the official website, and the main story was about Bono and Ali launching the fashion collection the night before. At the bottom of this article, it said, if you want to hear more about it, click this BBC World News report. So I was like, oh God, and imagine this would be all over the world and hotel rooms around the world. So I clicked, it was a 3-minute long piece. And it all had footage of this event, and it was very positive, and it had like people like Jeffrey Sachs and stuff talking about how this is the future of business and Africa and stuff. And then 10 seconds before the end of the clip, Tom Brooks said, but some people don't think it's a very good idea. And then it cut to me going, I think it's really elitist, I think.
They got you.
Yeah, so I'm sure if Bono was watching that, he was like, that was the fucking guy that wrecked my interview.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the ethics and these causes that you couldn't say no to. But I think the causes that John is taking up, that Bono is taking up nowadays, well, ostensibly they are for the forgotten. I think some people might have suspicions that there are other maybe agendas being pursued. John, is that fair to make that dichotomy there, or to establish that? Like, do you think that Bono is working for the good in the 21st century? I suppose I'll put it that way.
It's a kind of a complicated question, because I don't necessarily have any kind of objection to any of it, really, in a sense. I mean, it's very hard to kind of figure out this thing, about how the developed world helps the underdeveloped world, or whatever, or the undeveloping world, which is, I think, a better term for it. And I don't easily get into kind of slagging people off for do-gooding. I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, I remember actually at the very start of all kind of this kind of phase of rock and roll, when Bob Geldof launched Band Aid back in '94, I interviewed him for Hot Press, and I actually I put all those arguments to him, like in one kind of big kind of, what do you have to say to people who say that, you're really just supporting corrupt regimes, and, you're encouraging dependency, and you're kind of being patronizing, and you're just salving your own conscience, and blah, blah, blah. And Geldof said, well, he says, he said, fuck up and give me £1, because that pound will save somebody's life, and your useless, meandering philosophizing achieves nothing. And I thought, yeah, fair enough. That's a good, I think, that there's nothing wrong with that argument, right, on its face. However, in a certain sense, in other sense, there is a hell of a lot wrong with it, in the sense that all those arguments have some merit, if you actually did have a way of going about it to make things better in a different way. But that doesn't seem to work either, so there is a kind of an intractable nature about this whole problem. If you can call it something as benign as a problem, it's a massive kind of inequity in the world, and dysfunctionality in the world, which to some extent may have to do with the historical relationship between the West and, say, Africa, and the whole colonial history of the world in the 18th, 19th century. And I buy into that big time. And I remember actually, that was one of the things that myself and Bono used to talk an awful lot about, And I introduced him to Frantz Fanon, who was the guy who wrote about this stuff, the psychopathology of colonialism and all of that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of involuted pathologies and complexes that arise out of this that can disable the people. It happened to the Irish people in a different sense, and I suppose you might call it a less blatant, obvious sense, that your whole sense of confidence in the world as a people is damaged by this unless you deal with it, unless you find. That was what Fanon was talking about. He was a Caribbean. He was from the Caribbean, and he worked in Algeria during the Civil War in the late 50s. And his book, there's a book called The Wretched of the Earth, which I actually gave it to Bono at one point. And it's an absolutely stunning book insofar as that if you're an Irish person reading it, you think this book is about Ireland, you know, because he's talking about all of the kind of effects, the pathologies that bear down upon the colonized peoples. So I kind of was, that to me is the kind of issue, you know, that charity only goes so far. You know, it does keep people going, but it does create kind of dependencies, and all those things that we're saying together are true, but the other thing is true too. You got to do something. And I understand the instinct to do something as well. And I've been involved in those bits and pieces of that kind of work myself, not in the rock and roll context, but just generally, because, you know, that's...
Well, if I cut in there for a sec, in defense of, well, not really in defense, but you know, what they said publicly themselves is after they did Live Aid, which was a charitable mission to raise money for charity and to donate to the cause in Ethiopia, whatever, they realized that wasn't enough. And even though they do little things now and again, in large, they don't try and raise money like charity wise, you know what I mean? They try and get either governments to donate or to have businesses that are more business rather than charity itself, you know?
Sure.
So I anyway,
continue.
Sure, I'm sorry.
I think there is a relationship between all that kind of stuff and this, you know, there's a sense of the paternalism of the West towards Africa, say, is deeply damaging. It's not solving the problem of Africa, which has got to do, as I say, I believe, with its self-confidence and its lack of ability to kind of, like, Africa is an extraordinarily, you know, fecund continent. Like, it's an amazingly beautiful continent. You know, it's rich beyond measure, and yet its people, for all kinds of complex reasons, I don't want to simplify it, but certainly the history of colonialism did not help. And in some senses, you've got to say that, you know, I mean, this is we're kind of straying off the U2 thing particularly, but I don't want to lay this all on U2 or on Geldof or any of these people, but there is this sense in which that, you know, many times, you know, when you think about the way that the West deals with Africa, it's counterproductive. It does more damage in trying to do good than it does good, and I think that's undeniable. You know, I've seen it up in close quarters. I was involved with a particular agency in Malawi there for a while, which used to build wells, still does, but you know, the abject poverty that people have there is largely to do with the fact that it's not the lack of resources, it's lack of know-how, lack of memory, as it were. You know, that these people have lost their memories of how to be as a people. And all of this, you know, it's a very complex thing. And I think sometimes when you see a lot of this stuff, it's talking about transferring wealth and you know, forgiving debt, but that tends to be counterproductive. It doesn't work. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but it's not enough. It's not the answer. You know?
Don't you think one of the interesting things though about this band, for better and for worse, is that it actually has you though speaking and talking about these issues, whereas pretty much, I mean, I can't think of any other band that would make you talk about these things, even if you disagree with the way they go about.
Sure,
about.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, Stephen, I'm not saying that that is not a good thing to talk about. It is a necessary thing to talk about it. I just don't think we've got very far with it. You know, that's not U2's fault, obviously. But and I don't agree with the kind of school of thought that says rock and roll shouldn't, as it were, go there. I mean, that's not my view at all. I think rock and roll should go places that nothing else does. And I'm not one of those who slag Bono off for that, for his kind of alleged pomposity or anything like that. I don't find that. I've never found that about him. I just think that we're in a very strange phase in the world now, where we seem to be heading into, you know, a new kind of tyranny, which is, I would say, a corporatocracy, where the corporations will rule the world. And it's a strange thing that, you know, a lot of the corporations are involved in this kind of thinking, you know, that they're in kind of throwing money at Africa, but they end up getting far more money out of Africa than they ever put in. And it's a little bit like Bill Gates, who gets the word philanthropist attached to his name by the simple expedient of setting up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and getting back 95 cents out of every dollar that he pays in tax relief over 5 years. You know, and for that 5 cents in the dollar, he gets to be called Bill Gates, the philanthropist. You know, it's that kind of thing that bothers me. Whereas and it does nothing but, like, he goes around creating vaccinations in the third world, where you end up with like hundreds of thousands of young women sterilized by accident, and so on. That worries me, that kind of stuff. And I think if you're involved in it, you have to be so careful. It's not that I think you shouldn't be. It's not that I don't think that you know, but you know, sometimes you can actually be part of fronting up for something that's actually quite insidious.
Kevin, I want to bring you in here. You've been very patient, and I want to ask you about your early days of U2, and you witnessed a bit of a shift, I think, in how they were viewed, and the role that they played in the world, possibly. But anyway, can you tell me a bit about all that?
Well, yeah, I suppose I was introduced in 2003 at the Special Olympics opening ceremony. We were there, and they played Pride and One, and at the time I didn't even recognize the songs, didn't have the clue. But I was impressed, I suppose, and started listening to. I found the best 1980 to 1990, the best 1990 to 2000 in Dad's car, I think, the CDs, and started listening to them, and found myself listening to them again and again. And I think it was that summer I went to the Gaeltacht, and I was listening to the best 1980 to 1990, and one of the older lads in the house asked me jokingly if I'd been at Slane Castle 2 years before. Now, at the time I would have been 11. No, I wasn't at Slane Castle 2 years before, but I didn't know what that meant, so went and found out. And I think it was actually a cousin of Mark Tiernan's. You'd know him. He was a guy who was in played Gaelic football with me when I was a teenager, who copied that DVD for me, and I plunked myself down in front of the TV and watched it, and was simply enthralled, I suppose. And Rolling Stone later called that DVD the sort of definitive document of U2 live. And I think, despite being an album which wasn't as strong as some of their other work, All That You Can't Leave Behind and the Elevation Tour were an excellent showcase, I suppose, of U2's work sort of through the decades, and in a way that sort of introduced somebody like me, who didn't know the first thing about them, to this band, which is, I suppose, one of the best groups. I suppose one of the best groups at putting on a show, sort of putting on a live act, which I suppose inspires and really sort of amazes everybody who's there. No, I didn't actually see them live myself until 2005, the Vertigo tour in Croke Park. But sometime, I suppose, around then, U2, especially Bono, had become quite closely associated with George Bush in the efforts that he was making. Now, the efforts that Bono was making with George Bush was to do with aid relief and AIDS and relief for Africa. But Bono's association with George Bush in particular, I think, did a lot to damage his image with, say, the average person throughout the world, especially given what else, the other things that were going on associated with George Bush. So you had the Iraq War not going particularly well. And then in 2005, of course, you had Hurricane Katrina, that catastrophe, which was extremely, the causes of which were extremely complex, but which ended up being summed up as the words George Bush doesn't care about black people. Now, I don't know what John might think of this, but I don't know. In as you recall it, John, did you see that? Did you see sort of Bono getting too associated with an unpopular?
Well, I mean, in some ways, that was one of, for me, kind of Bono's admirable qualities, that he was prepared to kind of transcend the normal kind of prejudices about people in order to do the work that he believed was important. You know, where I kind of differ from him is necessarily the benefits or the beneficial nature of that idea of dealing with the problem in the first place. I mean, I can see why he would have, as the Americans say, reached out to George Bush, because I mean he was a president and so on, you know, and he also, Bono has also kind of an unexpected way of taking you by surprise about what he thinks about people and how he thinks about things. And he's a very smart guy. I mean, that's undoubtedly true. You know, he's highly intelligent, extraordinarily well read, and you know, very thoughtful. And you have to say, in my view, like, you really got to listen very carefully to what he's saying about things, because you know sometimes people are, you know, and here this is the point in relation to a lot of this, that maybe, you know, people are doing the least worst thing, you know, that's not a bad defense. If there's no better way of dealing with the problem, then you know the least worst is obviously the best. And but I don't necessarily see. The Bush thing is complicated, you know. I mean. You know, you got to remember as well that a lot of the prejudices like Bush or Trump are generated culturally out of, you know, a desire to be different, to be on the other side, to be, you know, there's a kind of a harking back to the 1960s kind of way of being in the world, that everybody wants to be a rebel, and you know, and that sort of leads people into kind of not seeing what's in front of them really very often. So I don't necessarily, I wouldn't fault Bono for that. I mean, I think what I'm talking about more is that this guy I was involved with, it was a friend of mine called John Coyne. He taught me when I was in school, and he was involved in a charity, and it's not a charity it was called, but a development agency, which he himself and his wife set up with their own money, and put everything into it to try and solve the problem of wells in Malawi. And built wells, you know, and he used to say repeatedly, there are two problems in Africa. One is called AIDS and the other is called aid. And there's a hell of a lot of truth in that if you just keep kind of, you know, throwing money at a problem or at a situation, without understanding what is actually the undercarriage of that problem, you're going to, you know, just prolong it and make it worse. And to some extent, I think that's true. And you know, Africa is still undeveloping. That's the problem. Africa is like a massive gerontocracy now. And all these young people emerging, and they just can't get a grip on their society. They can't seem to kind of function within their own society, you know. So, and the population of Africa is mushrooming now, and this is going to change the world in the next 20-25 years.
But like, it's important to remember that the purpose of Bono meeting up with Geldof or with Bush and all that kind of stuff at that time was focused entirely, if I recall, on the AIDS relief, on the issue of AIDS in Africa, on the issue of solving the AIDS crisis, particularly in Africa. It wasn't to do with solving poverty in the whole continent. That actually came a bit later. But that was the primary thing, was for the AIDS relief in Africa. And you know, Bono, it's interesting because at the beginning of the 90s, you can watch an interview with U2 there. I think they're on the Pat Kenny show or something. And during the interview, like, Bono like literally just sticks it to the George Bush Senior in the interview. And then a few years later, I remember they were getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he stuck, and the ceremony was in France, and he stuck it to the president of France at that time. But Bono subsequently said, you know, that he will he will have lunch with the devil in order to try and achieve some of the things that he wants to achieve. And I think, you're kind of hinting at the idea of talking about this idea of U2 being cool. First of all, I don't think U2 have ever really considered themselves to be cool. And I'm not sure anybody else is really, I mean, I think they're cool, but I don't think other people necessarily have ever thought they're cool. But one thing that Bono and the organization around Bono and what they tried to do there was what they realized is that he would literally shed any credibility he had just to be in the photo ops with these people, to get them to do the things that he needed to do. And he has said subsequently as well that, no one's going to remember their music in 100 years time, but this is like a much more important thing. And the reality is, if anybody could do something like that, if somebody could have a meeting with the president, like if you could have a meeting with Donald Trump tomorrow to try to speak to him a couple of things, I mean, you might be tempted to do it, wouldn't you? Just to like say, hey,
I absolutely would. Yeah, I absolutely would. I actually like Donald Trump, believe it or not. If you want to be absolutely,
I have my friends here wanting me to ask you questions here.
Yeah. I think Donald Trump is the best hope the world's got at the moment. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and it's very interesting, that question of U2 being cool. You're right. I mean, but there is an interesting kind of moment in their career where they did become cool. I mean, in the beginning, they were kind of like these kind of guys on horseback, or the second album, October, and then in War, actually, particularly in War. These guys on horseback with the white flags, and the Christian kind of image and all that. And then like there was a sense like they were completely kind of like naff. And that's why they went to America, because they couldn't really make any traction in Britain, because that was completely verboten, that kind of stuff. And they did actually make traction in America in that way. But then they did, like, to go through their, like, I think their best albums are, Unforgettable Fire is amazing. And I think, the Joshua Tree. Like what they did with the Joshua Tree is really astonishing, because they basically appropriated the entire history. These young guys from Dublin dipped in and snatched the entire history of rock and roll and put themselves in it. And I don't mean that in any kind of way that is kind of, like there was nothing wrong with that, because they did it so well. They actually created an album which was almost like all the songs that had never been written that should have been written in one album out of the history of rock and roll. And you couldn't believe it, like that these guys had actually had the creativity and the imagination and from somewhere had gathered the sense of experience that they didn't seem to have to do this. And then Achtung Baby, that was in the moment they came cool, because they completely, for the album, flipped their image. Bono did like this kind of like the Fly and these characters that he used to do, Mephisto, and suddenly they did become really cool, like, and people who had previously excoriated them started to say, wow, U2 are amazing, this is an incredible album. So, and this is a deliberate kind of strategy and very cleverly thought out, and showed a great deal of self-understanding and a sense of actually irony about your own image and how kind of naff you could become. But I mean, I do have to say, that I think that U2 had a lot, still have. I can't really say that they lack integrity. I just think they've made some bad calls and misunderstood things in some way, from my perspective. But I don't really slag them off. I think they're a really interesting band, and they're a very interesting phenomenon in the world culturally, because it's so rare, as you say, Stephen, for, or as you imply, I think, that so few bands, so few artists actually get down and dirty with anything anymore, and they really put their hearts on the line and say, this is what we believe in. Although, again, against that, there's been huge dissension within the band itself about some of Bono's activities. And I know Larry in particular has a real pain in his ass with it, he didn't want anything to do with it.
Kevin, so, I want to bring Kevin in, and well, Kevin, I think you had something to say there.
No, I was just going to say that Larry did quite publicly and famously criticize Bono for his association with certain politicians on the Late Late Show, I think in 2005, if I remember correctly. Would that be right? Does anybody else remember that, or am I just imagining things?
Yeah, no, I remember that. It was only a little. He didn't go too harsh on him.
Maybe he knew what side his bread was buttered on, as they say. But maybe
I always remember an example of, like, I mean, I don't want to. I always find the annoying thing when people talk about U2, and I find it all around the world. It's not just an Irish thing. If you say the word Bono to anybody, it's instantaneous. Don't like him. Instantaneous. That's what people say. And what I find, it's a bit like any kind of. I hate when anybody comes out with a cliche like statement, a statement that's regurgitated without them even really knowing anything about anything, whether it be about the music or whether it be about what the band actually do or anything. So if they just go, so when somebody turns around and goes, oh, Bono doesn't pay his taxes, so therefore I don't like him. It's like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But people are very good at just regurgitating very simple lines. I mean, I think the global situation is going on right now. When people come out with these general kind of opinions that are just so, you're just like, oh, it's not even a point of saying them. They're so cliched at this point, But it's the same thing with the band, I feel.
It's interesting you mentioned on the Bono thing. You obviously spent some time in New York. I've found that people in America are far more admiring of Bono than in Ireland. But fair enough, you've travelled all over the place, obviously. I think the Americans have more of an admiration of the go-getter in general than the Irish person. But anyway, Kevin, I want to go back. Yeah, go on.
He did mention that, actually. Bono did mention that in an interview once, that he found that Americans were more appreciative of success, whereas back home, when you see somebody who's more successful, there was more of an attitude of we'll get him, we'll sort of show him his place. But you were going to ask, sir?
But Kevin, John talked about the Joshua Tree, and my understanding is that a lot of that is about America specifically, and what you are very taken by is U2's place in the 2002 Super Bowl final, or it's called the Super Bowl, sorry, not the Super Bowl final, and the significance of that event. Can you try to paint that picture for us, and why did that mean so much?
Well, that was that's widely seen as one of the best Super Bowl halftime shows that had ever happened. Of course, the Slaying DVD was recorded on the 1st of September 2001, which was obviously followed by those horrible events in New York and Washington. And there's a video of U2 playing Madison Square Garden about a month after that, where they bring a lot of firefighters and policemen up on the stage and sort of sing Walk On with them. And Walk On itself isn't an especially strong song, but it's sort of it
great song. Sort of, what's wrong with you?
There's it's not a bad song, but it's not as good as, for example, With Without You. Put it that way.
Yeah, but you could say that about pretty much every song in the history of
you could say that about a lot of songs.
What song you mentioned there, Kevin? Sorry, I missed the song.
Walk On.
Oh yeah.
But rumor has it, I think, that Janet Jackson was supposed to play that Super Bowl halftime show, but it was felt they needed to find an act that could deal with the gravity of a huge celebration within America in the context of, what was it, 3 months or so after those events. And if you watch, say, watch the videos on the internet of that show, or of the sort of mini documentary the NFL made, you'll see all these comments underneath saying, I was there, I don't remember who won the match. All I remember is, well, the game, because they're American. All I remember is that show and that moment where behind them they have the names of all of the victims of the attacks sort of being projected up behind them as they play Where the Streets Have No Name. And this moment right at the end where Bono sort of finishes Where the Streets Have No Name, pulls out his shirt, pulls out his jacket, and there's this big American flag on the inside, and everybody, not a dry eye in the house. And it's the kind of thing that not many acts, not many people could have pulled off in the way that U2 and particularly Bono did. And of course, there aren't many songs that would carry that kind of performance the way Where the Streets Have No Name does. And I find now, of course, I was too young to be there for any of them, but looking back on videos and recordings, it sort of seems that the Elevation tour seems to be when they got really, really good at introducing Where the Streets Own Their Name, sort of kind of transitioning from the previous song to Where the Streets Own Their Name, sort of playing the opening chord, sort of teasing it a little bit, you know, brings in the drums, the lights all go red, and
well, the production of that show was like absolutely masterful. It was one of the most beautiful shows. The Boston show as well, which was before Slain, which is the DVD, or they have it online right now.
Yeah, I think it was March that year.
Where the band I was at one of the indoor shows, and you know, the band came on with the house lights up, and they were completely scaled down, minus the bombast of what they had done in the previous two tours, you know. But the thing about that album as well, you know, just actually talking about some of the music on that album for 1 second, you know,
probably should actually.
So you know, it might not be everybody's favorite U2 album, and it kind of has, when you think back to it, I think even U2 fans they get a little bit upset with that album, because the band now lean very heavily on it live, and also it's kind of set them in a certain direction where they keep on trying to repeat the success of that album in a certain way, which has made them, they're more obviously commercial. But anyway, one of the songs on that album was called New York, and you know, it seemed like the atmosphere of the album, or the emotion of the album, spoke to kind of what happened in the world a few months later, which was 9/11. And you know, it was very apt that they had a song called New York. And then I always remember the lyric. And New York, if you listen to the song New York, it is a big bombastic rock song. It's a really, really good rock song. But the lyrics in it, they've got lyrics that go, voices on a cell phone, voices from home, voices of the hard cell, voices down a stairwell. And I don't know what it is, but that kind of, you know, a bit morbidly, a bit evocatively, kind of like makes me think of the people when they were trying to escape the towers in the stairwells of that. You know what I mean? The lyrics just kind of, you know, rang true. And sometimes, you know, Bono manages to write lyrics that really transcend after the time, like even months afterwards. They had a song called Please on Pop, where the lyrics talk about, you know, September streets capsizing, spilling over and down the drain, shards of glass splinter like rain. Can you only feel your own pain? And then he talks about, he writes some good lyrics.
Stephen, to make an understatement, what was your, or John, what did you have something to come in there?
No, what Stephen's saying there is very interesting. I mean, I think that actually great art always is prophetic, you know, and I mean, great artists are capable of prophecy without, you know, in a way that we don't understand, really. I mean, if you think of, say, Bowie in Berlin in 1977 or whatever, I think it was about 77, and that song Heroes, which, like, you know, was like almost like a prophecy of the fall of the wall and the future in 12 years later, you know. And there was a story that Brian, you know, when he heard the song first without a lyric, that was the word he had in his head. And when Boyd finished the lyric and said it's called Heroes, like, you know, nearly fainted. So there's some kind of alchemy that happens around music that in that way that can actually see into the future. And not just music, I think also, you know, great novels and great, you know, it can be prophetic in that way. And that thing, I think what Kevin is saying about the song, I mean, there's an interesting thing about rock and roll. This is a kind of big subject, but because, and I'm trying, it's kind of complicated to express, but I mean, that point about some of the later songs not seeming to be as strong as the earlier songs, and I'm not necessarily leaving that down solid on the table, but there's something in it, I think, generally, that you can say, and it happens with all artists, and it happened with all rock and roll artists. Very few artists can actually do now the magic that they did in the beginning. Like Dylan can do it occasionally. You know, very occasionally Dylan will write a song that's as good as the best songs he's ever written. Very occasionally. But in 65, you know, like back in the 60s, he was writing them every day. And that's not just, I think, to do with Dylan as a person. It's got to do with the form, the music itself. That there's something in the collective imagination in the 60s that from the 50s onwards with Elvis, that exploded from Memphis and lasted for perhaps 10, 15 years and burned out then. But we're trying to get it back all the time. And U2 kind of got it back in a certain sense. Like they took U2 came out of the punk explosion, but they didn't like to be. They wanted to be something else because they loved the original music too much, and they didn't want to kind of, abuse it, as it were, which in a certain sense punk did. But they took a lot from punk as well. And I do think that, I've often said it, that, it is true, and it's true of almost any artist, that if they had started with the songs they were doing later, you'd never have heard of them. But that's kind of life, I suppose. It's the same with novelists, maybe. It's also, very, very, very rarely does a great novelist get better. They just kind of stay the same or decline. And that's just to do with the way life is, I guess. But I do think that U2, I mean, one of the things you have to say about them is no matter how much you get pissed off at them about certain things, and no matter how much you're determined to dislike them or to kind of say, enough, I've had enough, if you want to continue that, then don't go to one of their concerts, because if you go to one of their concerts, you're going to come out completely reconverted, because they are astonishing live. They're just
when you see them live, yeah.
I went to see random U2 live memories here for a second. I went to see U2 in the Joshua Tree tour recently, so I went to see their last 3 concerts. So I went to see them in Mumbai and Tokyo twice, and Seoul, believe it or not. So the geek or unique right here. And there was a moment in the concert where they played Miss Sarajevo, which is an amazing U2 song. And during the song, they had like all these like groundbreaking women of time, her story was the kind of thing, And I guess if you weren't really thinking about it, you might just think, oh, this is very cheesy, trying to like activate a certain part of the audience here, But what they would do is they would change the images of the women to be groundbreaking women from that place. So in Japan, it was a lot of Japanese women that I'd never heard of, and the same in Korea, and the same in India, And I noticed that, and this is where U2, when they're really good, it really transcends. But I suddenly noticed that a lot of the women around me were like literally tearing up and crying, seeing these role models or these inspiring women on the screen in front of them, larger than life. And then it started moving me, you know what I mean? Because I felt what that must have meant to them, It really is astonishingly, I mean, very clever, but really on the money. But I was going to say, another concert that I saw of theirs recently was, I went to the Berlin show. So Bono lost his voice in Berlin, and then they came back a month later and played in Berlin. And that was for the Experience tour. And they had done the Joshua Tree tour before that. So they decided not to play one song from the Joshua Tree. So this tour lent completely heavily on their new album, very heavily on their new album. And they did a lot of Acton Baby and stuff. And it was a great set list. And after the concert, my brother, who's, if Adam is watching, forgive me, Adam of a cool band in Dublin called Soda Blonde. Check them out. But he, Adam is he would be what I might dare call like a music snob, you know what I mean? He likes his music and thinks that he knows better about music than anybody else, like most of us think, But at the end of this concert, which I think was probably one of the best concerts by U2 I've ever seen, my brother said, wow, he said, if a band writes one good song, you're doing really well. 2 good songs, you're like really great. 3 good songs. But here's a band who just did 24 songs, none of them from their most famous album. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the concert, they were doing a song from their new album, and the whole audience was like singing along to it, was just carried on the emotional journey of the new song, And, so that's how great they are, I think.
That's very well put. Stephen, would you say that was your favorite kind of experience of them, or when were they at their best in your presence? You've seen them over 40 times, think, you said.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the great thing about U2 is they did, because the tour is all of different kind of like flavors to them. They have very different experiences. So whenever I'm showing anybody U2, I'm like, oh, you got to see this from this tour. No, you got to see this from that tour. And U2 have their concerts have like, they'll have a bunch of songs that have got a very political edge. Then they'll got a lot of songs that are just more personal, emotional songs. And then they'll just have a big fun part of the concert, which is just completely silly and fun. And another thing that a lot of people misunderstand about U2, and John kind of picked up on it a bit earlier on, is that after the Joshua Tree tour, when they went to Acton Baby, they learned to have fun with the craft. They learned how to be very tongue-in-cheek. And so what a lot of people don't know about the band is that they're very, very funny, and they don't take themselves that seriously. And they don't take them that seriously on. So a lot of people think they do, but they're completely missing the joke of what the band are aware of, you know?
No, it's very well put. I remember Kevin telling me they did something with the phone at the concert. Was that in 2018, that summer, the Innocence and Experience tour maybe, and you said they can only you two could pull this off or get away with this or something like that. Can you remind me, Kevin, what that was? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm not absolutely sure.
There was some anyway. They had some feature with an app, and you. Could
Yeah. So this was
yeah.
This is my theory. My theory on that. Yeah. Sorry. They had this. You're supposed to point the camera at the screen, and Bono comes out of the screen like this, and a 3D model of Bono comes out on your phone. But my theory about that was it was to waste everyone's battery in the first song of the concert, so nobody would be holding their phones up anymore. Which I thought was quite a genius idea.
Yeah. There is a video where I think in 2000 on the Vertigo tour, Bono is given out to somebody for being on their phone during the concert, and then of course that was a complete lost cause after the iPhone came out in 2007. So yeah, I think it probably was, and I remember downloading that app, and it was something. So the size of the app was absolutely ridiculous. It was in the gigabytes anyway. And yeah, I think it actually was. It was, here's phone time. You can enjoy your phone now, and then please put it away and just enjoy it. I don't know if it worked, to be honest.
Don't think it works.
It was worth a try. To go.
Yeah.
Kevin, you went to 8 U2 concerts, which is
I have
nothing compared to Stephen. I don't know if people heard this, but I said Stephen had been to over 40 concerts. John, how many have you been to?
Oh, I don't know. Probably about 15 to 20, maybe.
Okay, that's pretty good. But Kevin, you had a ticket for number 9 and you didn't use it. So why didn't you go to that concert?
Didn't know, and strangely, it would be. I suppose it would have seemed strange for me to think that they'd lay on the politics too hard, because I'd always defended U2 on that front. But during the Experience and Innocence side of that pair of tours, I just found that it had just gone a bit far, and that the use of the use of songs to kind of it seemed almost berate the audience into either supporting or feeling bad for supporting one thing or feeling bad for supporting another thing, regardless of whether you were on that side yourself or not. It just seemed unfair, I suppose.
Can you be a bit more specific about the technique that
the specific one? The point, I remember, I think it was in Belfast. I just sort of got a bit turned off was when they were playing Pride, and of course this is in the UK, which had not too long before overall voted to leave the EU. They had a big European Union flag behind them as they're playing Pride, and I remember Bono saying something along the lines of I don't remember exactly what it was, but it ended with "May these stars never fall," and it all just felt a little bit Chinese Communist Party, to be honest. And it felt almost like using these songs that people already loved to condition them into feeling a certain way, which maybe.
But if you remember the visual that was on the screen of the stars, one of the stars was a floating body in the water.
Wasn't that before? Wasn't that in the Innocence and Experience side of it? So
I know what you're talking about when the backdrop comes up behind it, but they also had one where the thing comes up on the screen, and one of the bodies or one of the stars was actually a body floating. Which if you didn't look closely enough at it, you wouldn't have recognized that one of the stars was a floating body. Just saying.
I do.
Sorry, Tim. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I do remember a visual with floating bodies becoming the stars from 2015, like from the 2015 Innocence and Experience leg of it.
Possibly so.
And I don't think anyone could criticize that too harshly, because I think regardless of what you think might be the solution, the idea of people just drowning in the sea is tragic either way. And stating that is perfectly reasonable. But it is possible. I wasn't looking closely enough. But I don't recall that myself.
What I'll say is you two have always been political. So sometimes people come along, not yourself, Kevin, but other people come along who don't know the band very well and go like, oh, they're a bit political or something. They've always been political. And if you don't like that, then you're going to be your band. They're just not going to be your band. And if it rubs you up a certain way after a while, then they're not going to be your long-term band either, because they're going to really annoy you. And Bono has flip-flopped clearly. Like he has become, unfortunately, chummy with the people that he was initially kind of trying to use and stuff. And that's been a big problem. I've been at U2 concerts where people have literally booed them, like very, very strongly. And I've also been at U2 concerts where Bono will say one thing one moment. So I was at one in Paris, right? It was an amazing show. And it was right during, there was a Roma Gypsies problem in France. And I think the French government were kicking them out or not treating them well or something like that. And Bono came out and he was like, France, you're not going to fucking stand for this, blah, blah, blah. You're better than this. And that's what I like hearing Bono say. I like hearing Bono say, fuck it, stick it to them. You know what I mean? I was like, yeah, come on. This is the Bono that I like. I like when Bono's like that, And then at the end of the concert, Bono goes, and I just want to thank Sarkozy, who's here in the crowd right now. And I was like, what are you doing? Why are you saying that? It's like, oh my God. And he'll do that. You'll be at a concert and you'll be like, okay, but he's doing it because he has to do it because he's trying to get them to do the things that he needs them to do. And he basically just knows that it's pissing off he knows fully well that it's pissing off the whole audience, but he'll go, and I just want to say, Bill Clinton's there in the crowd and whoever else is there in the crowd,
It reminds me of a quote from Adam once. He said, Bono is a complicated bunch of guys.
Yeah, it's a great quote. I love that quote.
Yeah, but I like this. You kind of have to go back to the beginning to see this. I mean, we could all come in on this in our own kind of partisan way, because you're not going to agree with everything, and you're not going to be, So, like, it kind of has to do with the nature of the kind of band that U2 is, I think. Which musically, if you go back to the very beginning, like they were the band like that kind of grew to earth as opposed to out of the earth. Their music was kind of from somewhere else in the beginning. Like the first album, those songs like Out of Control and I Will Follow and A Day Without Me in particular, like these are songs like that you never heard before, this kind of music. And that kind of came out of their inadequacy in a way, that they just so desperately wanted to go into this medium and make it their own and to build. And that was an interesting thing about them, like that it was their relationships that made them stay the course. I mean, like there was a story that told me about, Adam told me the story about how when he was in the beginning, that he was the poseur and he was the guy who dressed the part, but he had the bass guitar and the amp, but he couldn't play it. But they all liked him and they wanted to keep him, even though he couldn't play. And what happened was that the Edge actually developed his guitar sound, this kind of that kind of thing, in order to conceal the fact that Adam wasn't really playing as well as he should be, or as much as he should be, and it was to fill in all the spaces. And out of that, they kind of created a new sound. And that's kind of like, in a sense, the signature of the band, really, that when you didn't take them through, their whole thing was kind of like, almost like, and I don't mean this disparagingly because it's not, and ultimately, they were kind of wannabe. They wanted to be. They more than anybody else, they wanted to be in this medium. Because you actually think about it, like they were Irish, and they were kind of in between, in a certain sense, culturally, Britain and America. And the two were completely different. Like Britain was very hard and cynical at that time in the late 70s. Punk and all that, and it was, the NME was very hostile, very aggressive paper and very cynical, and U2 didn't fit into that, so that's why they went to America, as I said, and they made a strength out of that. And suddenly the reports coming back out of America about U2 was like, they were doing really well. And then they went on. And then you see, it was like at a time that nobody else really wanted, of the new generations, really wanted to possess this medium, what U2 did. And they did. I mean, that's the thing about the Joshua Tree. Like it possesses the medium. Like it is like a classic album by the greatest band, you would say. It's like almost like somebody was writing a movie about rock and roll, and they wrote the greatest album ever made in rock and roll. It's arguable,
and
right?
Yeah.
So
and
during,
go on. No,
well,
yeah,
I was going to say, I'm just going on tangents here, but speaking about the Joshua Tree, in one of their recent tours, they did Bullet the Blue Sky, and Bono often changes lyrics a little bit, you know, to update them for the times that we're in and stuff. And speaking of how like Bono has changed, there's a great bit during Bullet the Blue Sky in a new tour, on the recent tour, where in the lyrics, he's singing from his perspective to his younger self, and the lyrics were, Now the boy's behind a police line, and I'm on the other side of a barricade to myself, age 19. Other side of the barricade now, other side of the barricade. And the boy keeps shouting, we don't want you in a revolution. You're part of the problem, not the solution. We don't want you in a revolution. You're part of the problem, not the solution. And he's basically recognizing that he has now became basically literally what he hated when he was young, you know? Which I think is very clever.
Yeah.
Steve, yeah. But Stephen, I just want to ask you, you had 8 years, I believe, in New York, and you worked with, or you founded Balcony TV. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and what it was like at its peak, and for you, what has kind of happened since then? And yeah, what has all that been like for people who don't know what that is?
So one day I woke up in my apartment in Dublin in 2006, and I had a massive hangover, and I lived above a pub on Dame Street called the Oak, and there was a tiny balcony, very small balcony. And so I went out into the balcony to get some fresh air, and I used to never go out into my balcony because the Irish weather wasn't very good for balcony weather. And I noticed we had a great view down Dame Street. And so what happened was I came into my flatmates and I jokingly said to them that we should do something funny on our balcony. We should go out into our balcony more. Maybe we should have like poetry readings on our balcony or something. And very quickly we came up with this idea called Balcony TV. And the idea was that every day we do a little internet show from our apartment balcony. And what happened, it was just coincidental that it was literally almost the day that YouTube started. I mean, people didn't even know what YouTube was when we started. So what happened was every day I wanted to film a little show from my balcony, and my flatmate would introduce the show. But very quickly what happened was we started to invite up local singer-songwriters and bands to perform individual songs on the balcony. And we'd literally do it 7 days a week. And it kind of took off in a very strange way. We started getting invited onto I got invited onto the Dave Fanning show. And I was like, oh my God, about the Dave Fanning show. And then Paul Brady phoned me up one day and he was like, I checked out that Balcony TV thing you're doing. He's like, I think I might want to do it. And I was like, when do you want to do it, Paul? And Paul's like, can I come up in 10 minutes? And I was like, I got my flatmates. I was like, I better clean this apartment. Paul Brady's coming up and he's very intimidating. So a long story short, it took off in strange ways and people around the world started watching it. And then they started contacting me and they started asking me, could they start Balcony TV in their own cities? And so over the next 12 years, we launched Balcony TV in 100 cities around the world, and we made 20,000 shows on balconies all over the world. And because most of the artists that we featured, certainly in the early days of the Irish show, were relative unknowns, not all of them though, I must say that, because what I learned through the experience of Balcony TV is that every country has its own music ecosystem, and artists that we think are big you don't notice, but a lot of people don't. Like most people in America have never heard of Thin Lizzy, never heard of Thin Lizzy. And if you go into a record shop, they don't even have Thin Lizzy there. But yet in Ireland, we're like, oh, the greatest band of all time, Thin Lizzy, but they're not. They're good, but they're not the greatest band of all time. So for example, in Poland, they've got their own big artists and stuff. But because of that, we ended up filming Mumford and Sons when they were starting off, or Ed Sheeran or The Script or whoever, you know, or a lot of bands that have gone on to become very big subsequently. It was a big struggle over the years. It was a big roller coaster. It was just a fun idea that then whenever I was doing an interview, people started asking, "But wait, how do you make any money out of this?" And we weren't making any money. I'll let you in the secret. We weren't making a penny. But it was strange because from an outside perspective, it looked like a big global thing, which it was. But literally it was me on my laptop, this exact laptop, going, "What am I doing?" Hence I pulled out all my hair and went bald. But we eventually got investment, which led to me moving to New York to try to take over the world. And turns out taking over the world is very difficult. And Sony Music ultimately took it over. I didn't get rich out of it. A lot of people think I did. I didn't. Wish I did. So I ended up working for Sony for 4 years, running my baby. And then they laid me off. About exactly this time 3 years ago, they called me into an office and they said, "Stephen, we're letting you go." So they let me go. When they let me go, I was like, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I haven't had a proper job since I worked in Domino's Pizza and Rap Mines when I was 18. And the annoying thing was I had a lot of people contact me, sending me inspirational Steve Jobs quotes, you know? And I was like, I hope people don't think that I'm Steve Jobs, because I'm not Steve Jobs. You know what I mean? Like, some people are some people are geniuses, and some people, you know. So what I decided to do then is I decided to travel or backpack around the world and visit the 100 cities where we did balcony TV, and meet the people who I'd only communicated with online. And yeah, I started doing a bit of writing as well. I wrote my whole story of my 12 years running balcony TV for an Irish newspaper, but I wrote it completely anonymously, so nobody knew who I was. And it ran for 6 months.
So when you say you wrote that, did you not mention the name of balcony TV?
I changed everything.
Wow.
And I had people online like going, "Who is this mysterious person?" And because I wrote it anonymously, I could really like write about my descent into alcoholism, its effect on my relationships, the people that I hated, how I hated conference, how I hated business cards, how I hated people who pitched themselves, how I hated everything about startup land. I could bitch about anybody I wanted to, you know? And so that was very cathartic.
But now that you're kind of spilling that secret, could you get in trouble now, or did they has a connection been made? I don't know.
I don't have any money, so what are they going to do? They're not going to do anything. I don't give a fuck.
So if I may say so, the three of you have had, let's say, in one way or another, less than conventional career paths, based on what I know of the three of you. And Stephen, I suppose I'd like to start with you and say, what is it like to be laid off at 34? Like, it's probably a funny age where you're no longer young, and say if you're 22, it's a completely different thing from starting from then. And now you're not middle-aged, but you're kind of now you're in your late 30s. So can you try and paint that picture, and what's that like for you? And I think you said yesterday a reinvention. That was the word you used.
Yeah, I have to be honest. It's been rather challenging. I must admit. You know, I haven't applied for jobs before, and well, I mean, apart from like my Extravision down the street when I was a kid and stuff. And so when I got laid off, I thought, well, I better apply for a job. But then literally the moment of going about doing it, my energy level just fell out of me. And I don't know if it's like I've always been a kind of a creatively minded person, or an idea minded person, or an entrepreneurial minded person. And I do like being in control of my own destiny a lot, and being allowed to do the things that I want to do a lot. So maybe there's something in that just kills your spirit, you know, immediately. But it's true. Like, I don't have any kind of like, I mean, I have a lot of skills, but I mean, they don't fit into any conventional box. So I have applied for a few jobs, but I literally have not had one job interview, not one in 3 years. Nobody has called me for a job interview. And I run a global international network, for God's sake, you know? So I think the trick is to try and just keep yourself positive under those circumstances. And you also have to realize that, you know, money is not everything. And a lot of people are consumed by their desire for things. I became quite minimalistic a few years ago, like even before I left balcony TV. So I'm just not somebody that wants for almost anything. But a lot of people do want for things, you know. People want for a house and a car and TVs and children and stuff like that. Turns out if you don't really want stuff that much, you can survive.
You can get by if you're low mentions. And I'm fascinated by what you are able to do now. you're in Lisbon, and it sounds like it's nowhere near as, say, restrictive as it is in Ireland, where John and Kevin are right now.
So I was in New York for the first 2 weeks of the coronavirus, right? I was isolated by myself in this apartment. I swear, at the time, people thought it was in the air. They literally thought it was in the air. Cuomo had the press conference where he said they were going to need 150,000 hospital beds. And at that point, I remember calling a friend of mine and saying, Jesus Christ, this is for real. This is literally the end of days. Turns out they didn't need that many beds. But anyway, I came back to Dublin on April the 3rd because I figured I might as well spend the end of the world closer to my family. So I was there for 2.5 months. And as it seemed to be coming to an end, I thought, well, will I go back to New York? And I was like, not so sure. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll stay in Dublin. I thought, well, I'm not so sure about here either. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go somewhere in Europe. And I was initially thinking Italy, but the number one country that was kind of like open was Portugal. And I remember I had to contact the Irish embassy and ask, could I travel? And they were like, no. And then I contacted the Portuguese embassy and asked, could I travel? And they were like, yes. And I was like, well, that's weird. And then I remember I got the plane and I thought the plane would be empty, but it was full, which was really strange. And then when I got to Lisbon, a lot of people started messaging me from Dublin going, how did you go to Lisbon? And I was like, I got on a plane. And they were like, can you do that? And I was like, yeah, you can just get on a plane and fly here, apparently. So I've been here for 4 months, and Lisbon has been generally, as far as I can see, completely open the whole time. So I lived for 3 of those 4 months in a hostel, which is pretty much a human petri dish, right? A very cool hostel, but a hostel nevertheless. So I've been living around people. There's an old woman in the hostel who makes dinner for everybody every night of the week. She's 70 years of age and hugs everybody, right? Going to the beach, rooftop bars, the sun's been amazing. Do you know what I mean? I've been out all the time. Shops are all open, it's been amazing. And what's been interesting from my perspective is I kind of completely switched off news and all that kind of stuff. In general, I keep a vague eye on it. But then I'd call home or I'd call my friends in other countries and they're just like, oh, this is just so terrible. This is so terrible. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I just came from the beach. You know what I mean?
It reminds me, John, I remember there's a video of you on YouTube where you're talking about the 2008 financial situation and you said, if we just stop talking about it, it'd go away, and you're talking to Brendan O'Connor. I don't know if you remember that interaction. But Kevin, you are on the front line. You're on the front lines, and if I was at home, I'd be hitting a pot and a pan in your honor. So, as they say in America, to their military people, thank you for your service. But so thank you for your service. But how do you feel about all this? Do you feel like a hero?
When it first came along, I got this mask here before it really all sort of kicked off properly, because before it was officially actually sort of things are officially pandemics. Even when the numbers are low, they can be sort of officially a pandemic. But before it lockdown started, that sort of thing, I noticed that masks were running out online, so I managed to find one. I was like, just in case, we'll grab them. Now, where I was working when it started wasn't hit quite as hard as Dublin was, and where I'm working now in terms of pure numbers hasn't been hit quite as hard as Dublin was. So when I was essentially for the first lockdown, which was extremely strict, I felt extremely fortunate that I was just able to leave the house. I was talking to one person who told me that she literally hadn't been out of the house in about 10 weeks, and I sort of was thinking, I'm by far the more fortunate person here, and a lot of my friends actually picked it up. Working in the hospital, as far as I know, I've been tested 5 times, I think now, all negative over the months. As far as I know, I never picked it up myself, but fortunately, nobody was particularly.
I think I had it. I think I had it.
You think you did?
I think I had it. That's what everybody says.
I actually did have it, Stephen. So anyway,
these would be friends who worked in the hospital and got sort of got confirmed with swabs and the likes. But I suppose from my perspective, where I was, it didn't seem as quite as catastrophic as expected. Now there may be, for anybody, for everybody like me, there might be, you know, somebody who works in anesthetics or in ICU in, you know, in the Mater in James's or somewhere like that, who's just sort of got 1,000-year stare going, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, and is completely traumatized. But for me personally, no, I don't think I've really done anything to merit pots and pans being banged in my honor, to be honest.
I think that was in England, wasn't it? It didn't happen in Ireland, or did that happen in Ireland?
Maybe I don't know. Maybe it was England.
Yeah, but anyway, the same.
I do recall Leo Varadkar kind of stealing lines from Winston Churchill at the start of it, and sort of talking about how never before have so many owed so much to so little, to so few, and sort of we were all kind of sitting around the TV going, ah, come on now, this is a bit much. Like, we're not. It's not like we're going up to fight the Germans in Spitfires here. But I suppose that's one perspective. Other people might have had, especially depending on where they're working, might have had a very different experience.
Got it.
But no, it's all gone. It's all gone. I suppose it's all gone okay from my perspective.
Very good. Well, I'm glad you're still with us. And Stephen, your brother, as you mentioned, is a prominent musician back home, and I want to see, do you have any inside scoop or inside track on the mood of musicians, not just your brother and his comrades, but also I wonder, do you still have strong connections with that artistic community, or is that all finished now after you are no longer working for Balcony TV?
Well, I mean, the music industry in general is probably the worst industry that I would ever suggest anybody going towards. If I had a child and they ever picked up a guitar, I would tell them to put it down immediately. Well, the sad tragedy of my experience with one of the sad things I learned through Balcony TV is the amount of people that think that they are, you know, see, it seems to me that a lot of people pick up a guitar and can play the guitar and immediately think that they're and because of the technology now, you can just record a song very easily, or you can produce it pretty well, and you can be pretty good. But unfortunately, there is literally tens of thousands of people that think that they're recording artists. And so what you're seeing, and this, forgive me now for saying this, but I feel bad a little bit saying this because I'm all for the cause here, but you're seeing a lot of people who consider themselves recording artists thinking that they should be looked after by the country, but it's ridiculous. But in the olden days, back in my day, if you had ambition as a band, it was a real struggle to record something, like a massive struggle. So if you were lucky enough to record something, then you were part of a select small group that managed to send through your tape or demo or whatever, blah blah blah, to Dave Fanning or John Peel or whatever. But now everybody can record something, and so everybody thinks they're a recording artist. So it's an impossible situation to look after all of them. But I mean, obviously, it's a tragedy for people who are making money out of it. But if you're playing music, you should be doing it for the love of it. That's the only reason you should be playing it.
And it's a good point about the ease of access to the market, and also the fact that I think it's worth pointing out that by definition, if you are chasing the dream, you are making a sacrifice and saying, I know that this mightn't pay my way, and in spite of that, I'm going to go on board anyway. It's a bit like with tennis players, there's this kind of romantic image of the journeyman professional tennis player who's not making any money. And only the top 100 players out of about 2,000 make a living. And it's like, oh, poor me, I'm 800 in the world. And I kind of say, well, the rest of us have to do normal things and go to school or whatever it is, or go to work every day. And we forfeit the dream that you're pursuing in order to make our way. So I suppose you can't have your cake and eat it. But John,
well, as a wise person said to me once, when he asked me what he said to me, "How are you getting on with Balcony TV?" And I said, "It's pretty hard." And he said to me, "Well, yes, Stephen, it's hard to do anything. That's why most people don't do anything."
No, that's lovely. Well, John, you can't be accused of hurling from the ditch. You've written 10 books, but could you comment on the musical situation specifically and that kind of what has come out of that, and I suppose the musings from certain quarters in that community in the current context?
The lockdown situation, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, I mean, I wrote an article there about a couple of months ago, which hasn't appeared yet in the Spectator, in the US Spectator, and it's kind of about that. And what I was kind of, I won't go into the controversy, and I've been listening with interest in both Kevin and Stephen talking about this situation. I have another view of it, but I won't go into that now. But at the time I was thinking, it's a weird thing that, here we have really serious impositions on personal freedoms, which is kind of what rock and roll was supposed to be about in the first place. And there was actually no voices emerging from rock and roll about this. And I thought, I'll write something about it. And my kind of starting point, and this could have been controversial as well, but it was the idea, I was asking myself this question, like, would John Lennon have worn a face mask? That was kind of my question. And so, I assumed, I was kind of saying, well, he wouldn't. And so I just went online to see, just in case there was a picture somewhere of John Lennon wearing a face mask, which would screw my article up, And I couldn't find a picture of John Lennon wearing a face mask, but I found loads of John Lennon face masks, like pictures of John Lennon, and then Elvis face mask, and then there was Johnny Cash face mask going like this, and so I kind of went from there. And I wrote this article about it, like, well, it's like the title was like rock and roll never happened. And now then very shortly afterwards, I mean, that depended on that nobody had come up. Then, of course, everybody started coming out. The minute I sent the article off and they'd accepted it, Noel Gallagher came out and Ian Brown came out and then Van der Man came out. And but it struck me that it's very strange that nobody else has come out. Like Bono hasn't said anything about this, and why? This is very interesting, this whole thing, because, I mean, there's going to story come out about this in due course that is going to shock everybody, really. And it's just astonishing to me. And so, the music industry, like a lot of things, is being starved to death. It's been kind of dried up by this, it's kind of like, it's unbelievable, like, that you can't anymore go to a place and just sit with a drink or a cup of coffee or whatever. And
Lisbon, come to Lisbon.
Oh yeah, well, it's very interesting, Stephen, you say that, because I was remarking on that from the very beginning. Very interesting that, whereas Spain seemed to be ravaged with coronavirus, Portugal, which is the same landmass, wasn't. Why is that? Is there a line along that stops coronavirus along there somewhere?
I have a theory that okay, any controversial opinion that I'm about to come out with, that I don't necessarily believe it. I just want to put.
Oh, that's all right. None of us are controversial. We just say
I've got a feeling if coronavirus was not reported on, if people didn't report on it, then people wouldn't notice it.
You're spot on. I believe you're absolutely right. And I will say now what I wasn't going to say. Last week, the Department of Health in the United Kingdom actually confirmed that the virus SARS-CoV-2, the alleged virus SARS, has never been identified, has never been separated, has never been discreetly seen. And so that raises the question, does COVID-19 actually exist? I'm not saying this is Department of Health. Now, there's a scientist in Ontario called Denis Rancourt, in English, Denis Rancourt, I think they call him over there. And he's done a series of very interesting papers about this. He's a chemist, he's a physicist, he's all kinds of stuff. And he says two things. He says, first of all, there was no plague. He says, the spike which you see in multiple territories, you'll see it in Spain, you don't see it in Portugal, for example. It's very interesting. There's a very bizarre, almost kind of like icicle, inverted icicle, what do you call it, stalagmite or stalactite, I never know the difference. And it goes up like that, like literally points up, starting in late March, reaching its peak in mid-April, coming back down again by first week in May. And he says that was brought about by exactly what you say, Stephen. by panic in nursing homes, that people were killed by panic, by stress, old people who are very vulnerable at that stage in their lives. There had been a very mild winter season of flu, and these people were locked up. They had no fresh air, they had no vitamin D, no sunlight. They weren't allowed to see their families. They were heartbroken, they were stressed, they were panic stricken. They weren't being, if they got an underlying condition, because most people, when you get to 80 or whatever, you get lots of underlying conditions. Your immune system is working overtime 24/7. And they were left in this situation, and a lot of them would be religious people. They weren't allowed, priests weren't going in. All of this is what ROURKE says is the cause of the death spikes from coronavirus. And I think that that's something that the world is going, there's going to be massive inquiries all over the world into actually what happened. In my opinion, it is the greatest con in history.
Kevin?
Well, and now I'm going to get really controversial. So,
John, you're no stranger to discourse. You know, I love that they use that word as if, I don't know. Anyway, just the reason I kind of smile at that is that there doesn't seem to be any space for the discourse, you know, in Ireland. But anyway, Kevin, what do you make of what John just said with your experience?
I think it sounds quite strange that that the Department of Health in the UK would say that. As far as I was aware, the virus is reasonably I suppose the nature, the shape, how to detect the virus is reasonably well understood. And even though I was working in places which I suppose overall the rates weren't unbelievably high, there, you know, we did have some people, you know, landing in ICU who otherwise would, you know, you would think have no business being in an ICU. I think there's probably a very a difficult discussion or conversation perhaps to be had around I suppose how many years of people's lives are sort of being sacrificed versus being saved. There's but the idea that the virus doesn't exist at all, I think would not make sense compared to what I've what I've seen and what we've been doing.
Well, one of my issue, because I don't have too long here, so I might as well vent some random opinions here. One of the things that I've noticed since being over here is that I sit outside a coffee shop right outside in the morning time, and there's a mixture of children from the school and old people around the place. Now, don't get me wrong, they wear masks to different degrees. In my previous place where I was, there was an old woman who cooked dinner for us every night, as I say again. And what I came to feel, and I don't think there's anything wrong with going off a feeling sometime, going off a sense rather than constantly looking at statistics. But my feeling is that people in general are not afraid, right? So people in general want to just kind of get on with their lives and they accept whatever this vague risk is. In fact, people are far from afraid. Certainly over here, people are far from afraid. And so often when you bring up something like that in the discussion with somebody, they will say something like, oh, you don't care, but you obviously don't care enough about and first of all, it annoys me because I don't think people cared in general about old people before that, you know what I mean? People weren't rushing out to old folks home to talk to old people at all. In fact, old people were a much forgotten part of society. But you can't make people more afraid than people only have a certain level of fear within them. There's so many things that I'm genuinely afraid of in the world, but I don't have any sense of fear within myself about this thing. You know what I mean? So it shouldn't be forced into people to make people more afraid. Another thing is recently I have found that a lot of people, because the news media has ramped up again on these lockdowns and stuff in other countries, a lot of friends that I do know have turned around to me and said, I really think I have it now. I really think I have it. And they've gone to get the tests and they don't have it. It's just allergies or something. You know what I mean? So can you imagine the amount of people that are absolutely convinced that they have it right now, that are petrified and in other countries? And you know what I mean? It's madness. It's utterly complete and utter madness, you know? I don't know. I could rant about it forever.
I suppose one way, if we're gonna wrap up fairly soon, one way to round off is I'd like to go back to where we started and say, where is the place for U2 in the world going on? we forgot about them, you know. But what space is there for them? Or as John Waters wrote in 2004, after How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, why don't they dismantle themselves? Because I think your point there was we don't need them anymore. Basically, that was quite a while ago. So Stephen, I think I'll start with you. Is there a message that you think they could be, I suppose, taking up, and it doesn't have to be related to the virus necessarily, let's say?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a number of songs. Their new album was very, very strong. There's a number of songs on the album that are very, very, that resonated very strongly with me, because he speaks an awful lot about he speaks about like death and like his mortality and stuff. And
yeah, I think Lights of Home.
Yeah, it's a brilliant song.
Lights of Home. It sounds very much like written from the perspective of somebody who's just had a heart attack. And Bono would be about the right age.
Well, he did apparently have some kind of near-death experience the year before, which was never kind of disclosed what it was, you know.
But apparently in some interview he described it as an arresting experience, which may have been a hint. Now, you know, it was never confirmed, but you know, it's things like one more push and I'll be born again, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
you know, one more. It was let me see. It starts
one more journey. You can't travel with a friend.
Yeah, travel with a friend. I think it starts off with I shouldn't be here because I should be dead. It does really sound like a song that was written by somebody who had been had CPR performed on him. Love is bigger. It sounds kind of cheesy, but some of the lyrics in that song are absolutely, and there's only a few lyrics in it, but they're absolutely incredible lyrics. So I think they could still do very, very good songs where the lyrics resonate with you after the time and stuff and are very, very powerful. So the music's still there. The reality is, though, is that anybody with any band like to say, oh, their early stuff was, I prefer their early stuff. Like, that's, everybody's like that about certain bands, you know. And the thing about U2 is they've had so many different stages of their career. Like, for me personally, I don't need to hear Beautiful Day ever again. There's loads of songs by U2 that I love, but I don't need to hear them again. So I love any new stuff by them, even if it's not up there with or without you. I mean, With or Without You is amazing, but I mean, I think the songs on their new album are a lot more interesting, like lyrically, for example, you know. So there's that. Secondly, their shows are still amazing. Thirdly, they just broke every like sales record in terms of concerts. So is there a place for them? They don't need this podcast to confirm it for them. I think clearly there is a place for them.
How dare you, Stephen? No, I think you're.
I hope they're not watching this.
Yeah, well, who knows? You never know. But
I think Paul McGuinness was quoted in one of the papers a couple of weeks ago saying that, you know, we're never going to have concerts like that again in this world, in this post-COVID-19 world, which I think is a bit mad. You know, either the virus is going to work its way through the world eventually, and everybody will have got it and survived or died, or there'll be a vaccine. Somebody will come up with a vaccine. It's not like it can last forever. And don't
get me started on this vaccine. This is so my conspiracy theory thing is about this second lockdown thing. This is just all right. Listen, whatever. But I'm not saying I 100% agree with everything I'm about to say. But this lockdown, these new lockdowns, is a way to beat the people down, completely demoralize the people, so that people will queue up to do the vaccine when it comes around. People will just be like, even if people don't agree with the vaccine, they'll be like, all right, fine, give it to me because I just want to walk around properly. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You know, and you're going to need to clearly they're got like the writings on the wall. You're going to need like a vaccine card before you go into a restaurant or go on the plane or something. Blah blah blah. You know, it's madness.
Yeah, that's right. It's going to circumscribe freedom completely. That's why I keep saying, well, you know, where's rock and roll? What happened to rock and rollers on this question? You know, I think that's fundamentally to answer Fergus's question about U2. There's a real problem for rock and roll, which is that it's kind of become sclerotic around the question of what was hip and cool and necessary in the 60s. You know, the same attitudes, all the same kind of mentalities are still right there at the center of rock and roll, whereas the world keeps changing all around it. And it's not adapting at all to that. And that's why you actually, I believe, have this silence about something so fundamental as this. I mean, I predicted like we've had this new lockdown now for the last 10 days. I predicted about a month ago that they were going to do this because the PCR test, which is how they actually identify supposed cases of, can be manipulated in any way you want. You can get as many positives as you want because it's been established the test is absolutely worthless. And this is what they're doing. So I predicted what they were going to do was ramp up the case numbers. There are virtually no deaths of any kind, even though we can't even trust what they're telling us about deaths because they've been appropriating deaths and they've been attributing deaths. Like there was a thing in the stall there recently where the chairman of this committee asked a guy from the HSC, okay, so if a guy falls off a roof and he onto the ground and he's brought to hospital in a bad way and he's given a test for a coronavirus and it's positive and then he died of having fallen off the roof, what's that? He says, oh, that's a COVID death. The guy actually said that, right? That's what he said. That was his answer, right? Now,
yeah, McNamara is the TD, isn't he?
Yeah, McNamara. That's Michael McNamara. Right. Now, this is the point. So we have actually a massive scam on our hands here. Rancourt says that the idea that there is a single virus is a cartoon view of the world. And what's actually happening is they're appropriating all the normative kind of conditions and they're attributing COVID to them. Last year, I had a virus, I got a virus last April of last year, which was really a real virus, right? It's called Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. The virus is actually herpes zoster virus. It basically wiped out half my face. It paralyzed half my face. It closed my eye. Half my mouth is. I'm still deaf in my left ear, and I will be for the rest of my life. If I had got this year, I'd have been on the Late Late Show if I was in the mood to go on there, talking to Ryan and tell them about it. I had this terrible strain of COVID-19, and I'd have the entire country going around wearing fucking earmuffs as well as masks, you know, to avoid getting deaf. That's what they're doing. They're appropriating everything, and they're bringing in people. This is a scam. Now, going back to rock and roll, this is the problem. You see that people like the U2, they're highly original in all kinds of ways, but they've fallen into a kind of a rut of thinking about the world the way rock and rollers are supposed to think about the world. You know, if you actually look at someone like Dylan, he kind of keeps out of stuff. But if you actually go into what he says, read the book he wrote there, it's a long time ago, 15 years, it's very interesting, you know. The first part of his autobiography, which the second part will never arrive. You know, we've lost, this goes to the whole bigger question of what's happened to media. You know, I used to work in the media in Ireland, it just became criminal.
What's happened to the Late Late Show?
Well, yeah, I don't watch that either. But you know, it's like that we don't any longer have the right to have a full open conversation about anything. You couldn't have the kind of conversation we're having here on mainstream television or radio in Ireland. You just couldn't. They'd go to an ad break. They'd have gone to an ad break an hour and a half ago and they would never have come back, or else at least three of us would have been arrested by now, you know, or thrown out of the studio. So this is the problem. And it's the problem with rock and roll as well. So the answer in relation to U2, you know, U2 have a lot to say, a lot to offer, but they need to, from where I stand, they just need to kind of smarten up their thinking, stop falling into those ruts. You know, the flag thing, I agree with Kevin, you know, I think the Trump thing, you know, everybody hates Donald Trump, or they did at a certain point, apart from the people who vote for him, which is over half of America and will be again on Tuesday. Why do you two kind of think it's cool to repeat the cliches everybody else is spouting? You know, I find that irritating. And in a way, that was the reason I kind of admired Bono when he was kind of sucking up to George Bush, that in a certain sense he was bucking that trend. However, whatever you might have thought about Bush or whatever. But now it's kind of, everything is kind of like everybody has to double check everybody else before they open their mouths. You know, everybody's got to kind of make sure they don't say anything. And so everybody's got a PR advisor and everybody's got a lawyer, and, you know, and in the end, there's no point in any of it, including the rock and roll part.
Kevin, you have been to America a number of times, and you have, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a, I don't know if fascination the right word, but you seem to have, America seems to hold a place in your heart. So can you talk to me a bit about how you feel about the upcoming election? I know you're obviously not in America, but it's quite prominent right now. So what are your thoughts on that?
Last time, I suppose, I had this feeling that Donald Trump was going to win, which actually, the first time I started to think that he might actually be a serious candidate was when I saw, I don't remember where I saw the picture. It was a picture of Donald Trump in late 2001, early 2002, just sort of harken back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier. He was standing beside his proposal for the replacement for the World Trade Center. And it was the same two buildings, only 5 stories higher, 5 stories taller. And I saw this and I thought, oh, this person sort of, this guy gets something. He seems to have an intuitive understanding of symbolism and image, I suppose. And I sort of started reflecting, maybe actually if they'd done that instead of memorializing this gigantic gaping wound in New York, maybe if they'd had more of a show of strength back at home, the USA wouldn't have felt the need to act so, I suppose, aggressively, sort of aimlessly abroad necessarily. No, that's just an idea that crossed my mind. I thought he was going to win. I wasn't particularly invested in it either way. I wouldn't have been sort of upset if Hillary Clinton had won. This time around, I think there's an argument to be made that it might be better if he did win, because it might be worth sort of demonstrating that you can't just start riots every time you want to win an election, and and also I feel that he, you know, having watched I only watched the first debate, but he's been blamed very, very, very unfairly for a bunch of things. So, for example, it's Donald Trump's fault that a load of people died, but it's also Donald Trump's fault that the economy was so badly affected, you know, because loads of people died because he didn't force all the states to close down, but the economy was very badly affected because all the states were closed down.
Well, they do say he should have
really
acted.
Make sense, you know.
To give the devil its due, they do say that he didn't act soon enough, and as a result, we had all this stuff. But again, the Democrats have been called out.
Actually, his responsibility.
Well,
you know?
that too, but also there's people bring up the Nancy Pelosi in Chinatown, which has become a caricature at this stage. You know, saying come to Chinatown, basically, all that. But anyway. Yeah. No, keep going. Sorry, I wanted to make that point because we don't want to be straw manning here, you know.
Of course, and you know, listen, it's not like to be honest, it doesn't seem to me that whoever happens to be in the Oval Office makes a gigantic amount of difference to the life of the average American, as far as I can tell, given how many layers of government there are between the average American and the Oval Office. You know, you have your local government, your state government, and then it goes up to the federal government, and federal government isn't really, it seems, supposed to have that much to do with you. But I really don't know. It's very, very hard to tell. Obviously, Joe Biden is supposedly even further ahead now than Hillary was back then. But I think Nate Silver himself has just said that if Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania, Joe Biden's in trouble. So I don't know.
Again, as for Pennsylvania, I saw a fascinating graphic of Pennsylvania there yesterday, where I think this was of 2016. Maybe it's I think it was 2016. Practically the whole state is all red, but then if you go to the cities, it's blue. If you go to Philadelphia and maybe Pittsburgh and maybe Scranton, but the point being, you could have area-wise, obviously, much of the state, but it's one man, one vote. So anyway, I don't know about the Pennsylvania thing, but Stephen, you were an alien, a resident alien. I don't know if that's the right word, but you lived in America obviously a long time. I don't know if you're probably not allowed to vote. You're not a citizen, right? But how do you feel about all this? Or I'm interested that you said you haven't been watching the news a lot, so maybe I don't know.
Well, that's been so. When you're living in America, it is. I mean, it is. Can you still hear me? Hello.
Yeah.
Can everybody? Oh yeah, sorry. When you're living in America, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I mute myself.
Sorry.
When I stop talking.
Wow, that's really changed things. When you're living in America, it is 100% all consuming the news media talking about the president all the time, whether talking about the president being awful or talking about the president being brilliant. It's just nonstop. And when I was in, and the main thing, obviously, really over the last over the whole campaign, or over the whole of Trump's presidency, was the whole Russia thing, blah blah blah, Russia, which was just, I mean, it drove you insane, that thing, you know. Can't hear anybody all of a sudden. Where's everybody going?
You have the floor, Stephen. It's your time to shine.
Yeah. So you know, Trump, I think he's personally, I think he's awful. But my problem is that I think the rest of them are all awful, and they always have been awful. And Obama was awful, and Bush was awful, and Clinton was awful, and they're all awful. And they're not, again, maybe some of them are not quite as awful as the other ones, but it's only a little difference, not a huge difference about how, you know, and some people might say, oh, what's the lesser of two evils? But it's really, it tends not to be that far apart, you know? So, yeah, I think.
Do you mind me asking, I didn't really plan this in advance, but did your dad have any views on the political system? He was a doer, if I'm not mistaken. He got his, maybe, I don't want to make a false comparison. He was no political icon, but maybe you could compare him in his visionary will to build to maybe Donald Trump. So did he have any kind of perspective on the ways of the world?
My father was not Donald Trump.
No, he wasn't.
Although I do think I saw The Art of the Deal when I was younger in the house somewhere. But also he had like Richard Branton's book, all these kind of like, you know, business, you know, books. So for anybody listening, my father was mostly known for opening bars in Dublin in the 90s. So he started off with the Temple Bar pub, and then kind of every pub he opened over the next decade was kind of the coolest pub that Dublin had seen. And that culminated with the Morrison Hotel, which was like one of the first boutique hotels in Dublin. But he, outside, funny enough, when he was opening pubs, he used to always hate being called a publican. So whenever the press wrote about him, they'd always call him a publican. And that kind of annoyed him because he was always trying to do different things. And he had mad ideas, and when he had an idea, he would go for it, you know. And his heart was very much in the right place, and especially in the latter years of his life, he very much tried to devote himself to working on the big issues of the life of the world, whether it be like the peak oil crisis or global warming, whatever, blah blah blah. So politically, I think I remember him telling me a story once about how he met Bertie Ahern once, and Bertie asked for a backhander, but I can't remember the story. But you know, probably shouldn't quote me on that. I don't think my dad was very good at kind of very good instilling me with a sense of like flipping the narrative and questioning the things that are obvious to, you know. So I remember for one example, like when I watched like Fahrenheit 9/11, the documentary, and I was like, oh my God, this is an amazingly powerful documentary. And I was like, it's just terrible, Dad, isn't it? And my dad was like, yeah, but I mean, maybe they need to get the oil out of there because the oil's being held up and they can't get the oil, and the world needs the oil, so they need to get the oil. Have you thought about that, Stephen? And I was like, I didn't think about it quite like that, but you know what I mean? Not that I'm saying that that's what he believed in, but he'd make you to like flip the conventional obvious narrative that's in front of you, you know what I mean? And I guess, you know, the thing about the coronavirus situation is that I am just unbelievably amazed at how few people question anything in this situation. Like, it just, you know, if this was a big global experiment to see how easily people are able to march in order, it's completely worked because people have just become complete lemmings, you know? But yeah, I can't really say much more than that.
No, that was, a brilliant answer. And what I wanted to do there was not to say, no, was he this or was he that? It was the point. It seems to be that he transcended all that. You know, he didn't get bogged down with these kind of, as you said, the lesser of two evils. It's all just a bit of a charade, maybe. But John, do you want to round us off and maybe give us your 2 cents on all of this?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I really agree with Stephen there about this kind of necessity to flip the narrative. You know, that's what journalism is. You know, I mean, I was a journalist, and that's why I kind of quit Irish media, because they stopped being interested in that. They started to promote ideologies. And that's what you find in the United States. Like, the media are no longer the truth tellers. They're no longer the fourth estate. They're no longer there to support a public conversation. They're there to actually impose a certain outcome. And you know, I've started up in the last week. I've started up on a thing called Substack, which I'm not sure how to describe. It's some kind of platform that people can. Since I've gone on, I thought I was the first, but now everybody seems to be on it. Every day I hear about somebody that's on Substack, and it's kind of, you have a page. It's like a blog, but you can put up any articles and videos you want to do. It's your thing, you know, and you can actually monetize it if you want. And anyway, one of the things I've done in the last week, I've put up a 3-part series on Donald Trump, which is about nearly a book length between the whole lot. It's incredibly long, and nobody will ever finish it. But one of the things I talk about, it's interesting what Stephen is saying there. You know, I have a theory about Trump. If you go back there's a video online of Donald Trump being interviewed in 1980, 40 years ago. And you want to watch this, just put in Donald Trump 1980 interview. And this guy is not the same man. He's a real sweetie. Like, he's kind of really talking very low and very soft, like Elvis, you know. And he's so, you know, and he says, he was asked, would you like to become the president? Would you like to go into politics? No, he said, it's a very mean life. It's a very mean life, you know. And it's amazing to watch. And my theory is that Donald Trump, who wanted to save his country, invented this grotesque persona and started to add layers to himself in order to actually go into to an area that he felt was untouchable, that he didn't want to go into. And he's in there now, and he's pointed, you see the agenda. This is why I get frustrated with the Bono thing and the U2 thing and the whole rock and roll thing, is that these things are happening. One of the things that's happening in the world, which is major in the Western world, is that we're on the point of the obsolescence of human labor to a high degree, right? Because of AI. And it seems to me that the struggle that's going on in the world now has fundamentally to do with the division of the spoils when that big bang finally happens, which won't be that far down the road. It could be 5-10 years. And that the blue collar people of America and of the rest of the world, although that phrase isn't used anywhere else, but we know what that means. It means the working class, the people who work with their hands, who make and mend things, who build things, who clean things, who paint things, you know, that these people have become extraordinarily disrespected in our cultures. And that there's a kind of a almost parasitical class that has kind of grown above them, who are kind of like, you know, the tippy tappy people, like, you know, and who kind of are kind of parasiting of the whole world that has been built by these people. And Trump came along and he recognized these people, and bizarrely they recognized him. And I think the reason for that is that Trump had a way of actually relating to people like that, because even though he wasn't of them, he was the boss, he was the builder who came to the site, and he always went to the crane driver and the guys up on the scaffolding or the guys down in the foundation. And he was talking to them, and he actually began to understand something. And that's what he made the platform out of. That's how he built his platform. And I think that that's the battle, because really what it's about fundamentally is that there will be a dividend when the world shifts to AI. And there will also be a need for massive cultural change, in the sense that we need to reinvent the world so as to extend to communities and to families and to human beings the capacity to acquire dignity and a way of living that transcends actually having to earn your living in the old-fashioned way. Now, that's an almost impossible task, but it's a cultural job that we should be talking about, and we're not. And it seems to me that's what Trump is in on. It's what he's on about, really, fundamentally. Even though, and I think he's a lot smarter than he makes out to be, and that anybody, even his greatest fan, thinks he is. He just has a way of understanding and translating things into the most almost banal phraseology. And I think he's one of the most extraordinary phenomena that the political world of the West has ever seen. And I think he's going to win on Tuesday by a country mile. Joe Biden, all those polls are false. They're all fake because the media is utterly, profoundly corrupt. I promise it. You come back here. If you want, come to me here on Wednesday night, and I will be raising it.
Let's just do a live thing as the results come in, and we can argue then.
Yeah,
all night long.
Let's do it. I'm prepared to. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm not. I called it the last time, and I call it again. Donald Trump by 1,000 miles.
Well, there you go. You heard it here, not first, but you heard it
all
here.
Right, can I do a quick sign off here? What I'll say is, can I do a sign off?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I want to recommend a documentary for anybody that's still here. What's it called? It's called "Give Us the Money." So you type into YouTube, "Give Us the Money, Why Poverty." And it's a very, very, very good documentary about Bono and Geldof and how they got involved with Bush and what their strategy was and stuff. And it kind of analyzes it from gives the African perspective and stuff in terms of how they feel. It's a very good documentary. Recommend watching it. And finally, I just want to say, in terms of rock stars that have worn masks, Adam Clayton wore a gas mask or a mask throughout the whole of the Pop Mart tour. So if you type in Adam Clayton Pop Mart into Google, he wears a face mask throughout the whole thing. So there you go, full circle.
Stephen, if we want to find you online, we look up Stephen O'Regan on YouTube. Is that correct?
Well, if you check out my YouTube channel, my new one, it's called People of Lisbon. So People of Lisbon. And as long as you subscribe to that, I'll be very grateful.
Kevin, are you doing any more output? I know you've written some things and made some videos. Can we give you a plug?
I haven't written anything of late, but maybe I should. I think to be honest, that there are things I would like to say, like to figure out, I suppose, about our current situation, which I'm probably better at if I get to look at the words in front of me. So okay, I will do my best to write something worthwhile.
Good stuff. Well, maybe
stick it on your website.
Maybe John can give you some tips. And John, where can we find you in the coming while?
As I say, I've just started this thing on Substack, so it's johnwaters.substack.com, and it's John Waters on. I'm not sorry, I was going to say Unhinged. It's not John Waters Unhinged. It's Unchained. It's the Johnny Cash song that I love, and well, he didn't write it, but he does the best version of it, and it's kind of just, it's like, I suppose, a blog, I don't know, but it's got lots of articles, and I'm going to put up more and more videos and all that kind of stuff. I might even put up this when you
very good.
I'm going to steal it and put it up.
Please do.
And because I think it's very interesting, and I think this has really been a great conversation. You know, I mean, this is kind of like we all different perspectives in a way, but this is how it works. You know what I mean? That, you know, there's distance between us, but in the course of the conversation, that distance has closed. Maybe, you know, I find myself kind of with Stephen a lot and with Kevin a lot and other things, and you know, the gaps are narrowing, and that's what conversations do, and that's what we're missing in our conversation, because everybody starts either out there. Or
John, you could say we're one, but we're not the same. You know what I mean?
Very good one. I'll write that down now, Stephen.
We got to carry each other.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So it's been great. Thank you.
There you go. No, thank you all. And I'm going to stop this stream. I just want to lastly say thank you if you have watched or listened to any of this, and please do share it with your friends, with your foes, and with your family on whatever platforms you might be using. And please join us again next Sunday at 7 p.m. Irish time, 2 p.m. Eastern time